In this video, we will start our discussion about DDL, Data Definition Language, and we will focus first on table creation and manipulation. Now, for data definition language, what we need to know is mostly those three commands. Create schema, which is how to create a database. Now, if you are using MySQL Workbench, you don't have to write this command because when we click the button that's going to create the database, it is going to actually show you that code. And if you are curious and you want to write that code, the code is create schema, and then you define a schema name. Just create schema. Let's say my schema is CS3200, so it's going to be create schema CS3200, and then run that command, and then your schema or database is going to be created. Now the next thing is you need to create tables in your database to be able to load some data in those tables, and this is going to be our focus. So create table is the command that is going to help you define the table and define its columns, data types, and then this is going to allow you to insert some data in that table. Now what we are trying to cover is how to create a table using the create table command. We will see two ways, either creating a totally new table or creating a table based on a previously created table. We will see how we can add columns to an existing table, how we modify the column definition in an existing table. So what I mean by column definition is the name of the column, the data type for the content of the column. We will see how we can modify that. We will see how we can delete a column from an existing table, how we can rename a table, how we can truncate a table, and how we can drop a table. Now for the last two, truncate a table and drop a table, most of the people when they hear of the word truncate, they think that, okay, we're cutting some portion of the table. In databases, truncating meaning getting rid of all of the data but keeping the structure of the table. So in other words, truncating the table is deleting the data entries in the table. Now dropping the table, on the other hand, is deleting the table and its data. So deleting the data and definition, and you don't have anything from that table anymore when you use drop table command. Now to create a table, the general syntax is create table, table name, and then in parentheses you will have all of your column definitions and possibly some constraints. And then you can have some other constraints like when deleting and reversing rows. So we will not cover this on comment delete. It's out of the scope of this course. We are just concerned about creating the table, setting the column names, their definitions, and some possible constraints on those columns. Now let's see some rules before we create tables. Column definition list must be enclosed in parentheses. You have to enclose the column definition list in parentheses. And when you look at the create table command and you see how the command is written, you will appreciate the relational model text-based representation because it's going to look pretty similar to that, except you will have to add your data types in there. Now data type must be specified for each column. For each individual column name, you have to follow that by the data type. The maximum number of columns, if you're curious, it's 1000 columns. So you cannot have a table with 1000 columns, although I don't think it's going to be a good table. It's going to be probably a bad table. I don't see any entity with 1000 attributes, but this is a possibility right there. Now we will see some example right here, and then we will jump to doing some more practical stuff. So this is an example of creating table. Create table publisher. Now the table name is publisher, and then you see the columns listed in there. Pub ID, which is the publisher ID, it's an integer, and then we have name, and then we have contact, and those are what we call varchars. We will go more on those data types in a bit. And then we have constraint, and you have the constraint name followed by the constraint type, which is primary key, and then in parentheses what's that primary key. We will dissect each part of this command so you can fully understand this, but this is just to show you an example of that command. Now to create table, I just said we will see how we can create a table from nothing and how we create a table based on an existing table. Let's start by creating a table based on an existing table because it's going to get you the idea on that. So creating or copying a table, we will use the concept of subquery. Now we will cover subqueries later on in the course, but we will just use it briefly in here. And this is going to allow us to copy the table or the content that we get from a select query into a new table. And the syntax is create table and then table name and then as some kind of select query. So let's just do some example in here. Now select star from books. Let me say where category is equal to, let's say, cooking or children or anything. So okay. Now if I run this portion of the query, I get 2 books here. I can create a new table that is going to have all of this information. What I need to do is surround this query by the parentheses and then say create table, and I will call my table cooking books. You can call it whatever you want, and then you say as this select query. Now if I run this and then I go to the list of my tables here and update, so you need to refresh to see your table reflected in here. I don't see it right here, but if you refresh, you see I got a table that's called cooking books. Now if I expand this, I will have the same columns as books. See, I got the exact same columns, exact same column definition, although there are some things that are missing and I will show you in a bit. But then I have only the data that I got from this select query. Let's double check. Select star from cooking books. Now that's everything that's in cooking books, which is whatever I just filtered out. So this is a typical problem where you have to copy some portion of a table and save it into a new table. Like for example, what we did right here is we copied all the cooking books into a new table. And no matter how complex your select query is, whenever you get your query running, you just surround it in parentheses and proceed it with create table, table name as, and then your select query. And this is going to copy all of the data from your select query into a new table, regardless of how many data pieces are there, how complex is your select query. Now again, just to recap what we have seen, which is create table, table name as something. This will copy the data from the select query into a new table. Now, as I said, there are some things that are not going to be in there, which are constraints. It's not going to copy the constraints for you. You must put them later on if you want to. And again, you have to have a name for the table. Now, what I mean by it's not going to copy the constraints, let me show you something. If I just describe books. Now, if you look in here, ISBN is the primary key for that table. And we have a foreign key right here by the keyword MUL, which is standing for multiple. So this is a foreign key. Now, let's describe cooking books. See, there are no keys in this table. It's, however, going to copy the constraint, whether it's an optional or a required attribute. So when it says null right here, if it says no, that means this is a required attribute, and when it says yes, that means this is optional. So this is the only required attribute in this table, and all of the others are optional in this table. But as we said, it did not copy the keys. It copied the structure, but it did not copy the keys. If you want to add the keys, you have to add them manually later on.